Ebola outbreak. Ebola outbreak 2.0. I don't know how many Ebola outbreaks we're at, but now we've got a serious potential global emergency. Congo's Ebola outbreak might be declared a global emergency. A top Red Cross official says he's more concerned than I have ever been about the possible regional spread of the Ebola virus after a new spike in cases. We saw this several years ago, and in response to, I think it was 2014, there was a big Ebola outbreak. There was a lot of concern as to whether or not Ebola would make it to the U.S. My understanding is that there was some Ebola in the U.S., but ultimately we are fine. So, we'll read through this. I also have a story where the AP breaks down why this one is potentially bad. And I also have this. How ready are we if Ebola hits the U.S.? So I think one of the advantages we have is, and this is not meant to, we're not as impoverished as Congo and some of these other places. And that means that when people die, they get quickly and properly disposed of, usually. And it typically means that there's more access to, antiseptics and hygiene and stuff like that, which can protect, as well as the rapid response we'll see from the CDC that Congo doesn't have. But let's read the story. A top Red Cross official said Friday he's more concerned than I have ever been about the possible regional spread of the Ebola virus after a new spike in cases, as the World Health Organization met on whether to declare the outbreak in Congo an international health emergency. Emmanuel Capobianco, head of health and care in the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, cited Congolese health ministry statistics showing 40 new cases over 2 days this week. He called that rate unprecedented in this outbreak. The Ebola outbreak in Congo, announced on August 1st, has become the second deadliest in history. Okay, so I was right, number 2. Behind the West African one from 2014 to 2016 that killed more than 11,300 people. Congo's health ministry on Thursday reported 1,206 confirmed and probable cases, including 764 deaths. To be designated a public health emergency of international concern, a situation must be serious, unusual, or unexpected, threaten to infect other countries, and require immediate international action. One of the comments I saw in response to the story was, I'm moving to Greenland. If you understand the reference, it's from, I think the game's called Plague Inc., and Greenland is the heart. In the game, you're trying to spread a disease around the world. I think you are the disease, I don't know. And you can evolve, but getting to Greenland is really, really hard. So people have made this joke. But my understanding is that one of the reasons Ebola has spread so rapidly, in the 2014 outbreak and potentially today, is because of superstition and fears about what's actually happening. There are stories about people dragging dead bodies and infected mattresses through the streets and just leaving them around. And there are stories about people escaping quarantined hospitals because they think it's like a curse or something. It's superstition. They don't know that they have an infectious disease. I will add, however, or I will add to that based on American standards and superstitious beliefs, I think it's much less likely we face the same kind of thing. Admittedly, I'm not the expert. What's more important is to look at what preparedness we have. And I have done a couple stories about this in the past. I actually met with the CDC and talked to them about this in response to the Ebola outbreak. But let's read on. The outbreak has been like no other. Capobianco cited lack of trust about Ebola treatment in the community, which had never faced an outbreak of the virus before, and insecurity caused by rebel groups that has hurt aid efforts. The outbreak is occurring close to the borders of Uganda and Rwanda, with South Sudan not far away. Trish Newport, Doctors Without Borders representative in Goma, a major crossroads city close to the outbreak, said declaring a global emergency wouldn't necessarily help stop the epidemic. Bigger is not necessarily better, she said. Doctors Without Borders is calling for patients to be treated in existing health centers rather than Ebola-specific clinics. It's very clear that people do not like or trust the Ebola centers, and they're not coming to be treated, which is another major issue. Newport said 75% of new Ebola cases have no obvious link to previous patients, meaning that officials have lost track of where the virus is spreading. Previous global emergencies have been declared for the 2014 Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea, the emergence of Zika virus in the Americas, and the international attempt to eradicate polio. WHO was criticized for not declaring the 2014 Ebola outbreak an international emergency until nearly 1,000 people had died and the disease had spilled across borders. Emergency declarations almost always boost global attention and donor funding. In recent weeks, WHO has noted it is woefully short of the $148 million it says it needs to fight Ebola for the next 6 months. It has received only $74 million as of mid-March. Tariq Reibel, who is based in a current Ebola hotspot, Butembo, for the International Rescue Committee, said a major obstacle to stopping the outbreak is that officials are simply unaware of how many Ebola cases there are. We're discovering people when it's way too late, he said, noting numerous cases were buried in secret and never reported to authorities. I don't think we're going to have that problem if Ebola comes to the U.S. Given the average number of cases we're seeing now, this is not going to be over for at least another 6 months or more. So the AP has this story, which just came out just before recording this, explaining why this is, second worst Ebola outbreak is a growing concern. It's possible this becomes the biggest, right? It could surpass the first, depending on what happens. So they say, first, let's talk about what Ebola is. Ebola is a virus that can spread quickly and can be fatal in up to 90% of cases. The symptoms include fever, vomiting, diarrhea, muscle pain, and at times internal and external bleeding. Symptoms can start to occur between 2 and 21 days from infection, according to WHO. The virus is most often spread by close contact with the bodily fluids of people exhibiting symptoms and with objects such as sheets that have been contaminated. Healthcare workers are often at risk of being infected, and burial practices that call for close contact with Ebola victims can spread disease. Dozens of people in this outbreak have received one of several experimental Ebola treatments, but their effect is yet to be fully studied. While there is no licensed treatment for Ebola, receiving early care such as rehydration and treatment of other symptoms helps to improve survival chances. A new experimental Ebola vaccine has been shown to be effective. Congo's health ministry on Friday said more than 98,000 people have been vaccinated. Now, why is this one unique? They say health workers have called this the first Ebola outbreak to occur in what is essentially a war zone. Multiple rebel groups are active in Congo's northeast, killing hundreds of people in recent years. Attacks have led to a traumatized population that can be wary of outsiders. Some residents have been on edge because health workers are accompanied by armed guards from the UN peacekeeping mission or Congo's security forces. Many accuse the government of not protecting them from attacks. This is the first time an Ebola outbreak has occurred in this part of the Congo, and health workers have battled misinformation as they explain the importance of safe burials and other preventative measures. 1 out of 4 people interviewed in eastern Congo a month after the outbreak began believed Ebola wasn't real, according to a study published in the Lancet Infectious Disease Journal last month. Some residents have rejected Ebola vaccinations and fled or attacked health teams. Doctors Without Borders was forced to shut down 2 of its Ebola clinics earlier this year after attacks on clinics. This has hurt containment efforts, particularly the painstaking work of tracing contacts of infected people. Many new cases are still unconnected with known ones, a sign of the challenges that remain in a dense and highly mobile population. They go on to say that it's hard to know how long this could last. They predicted months ago that it would end within 6 months' time, but it's still going on. Given the average number of cases we're seeing now, this is not going to be over for at least another 6 months or more. This is a growing concern, mostly because people are worried about whether or not it'll spread to foreign countries and then ultimately find its way to Western nations. So let's hop over to the Association of American Medical Colleges. This is from last August. Are we ready if Ebola hits the U.S.? They say, this week in the Congo, they announced 33 people had died in recent days of Ebola, just weeks after declaring an earlier outbreak contained. You see where we've gone since then. In 2014, when the virus infected several U.S. citizens, we were woefully unprepared. Yikes. They say, imagine a doctor in a U.S. hospital treating an Ebola patient. The clinic is chaotic and loud, and the patient is vomiting, covered in bloody emesis. The doctor studies the scene. She needs to make life or death decisions. How does she respond? This is one of multiple likely scenarios in the University of Nebraska Medical Center's upcoming virtual reality room, part of a $120 million, 190,000 square foot training facility. Opening in May 2019, the VR room will simulate almost any environment from a smoke-filled terror attack to a hurricane-ravaged town, allowing healthcare professionals to perform triage, emergency care, etc. Well, let's jump to the end, because the issue of whether or not they're prepared, I think, I don't know if they're going to summarize, but they say, as effective as these training exercises have been, the concern now is as much about funding as fevers. The 5-year funding for the NETEC and the regional treatment centers expires in 2020, and many veterans of 2014 worry that the network will disappear without federal support. We were scrambling in 2014 to find facilities beyond Emory, Nebraska, says Harvey, who noted that federal funding to increase Ebola preparedness will reach $56 million by July 2019. $32 million for the regional treatment centers and $24 million for NETEC. Now we finally have sufficient capability throughout the country, but that capability isn't going to stay unless we nurture it. I could envision a scenario where there's an Ebola or Lassa fever outbreak in 2023, and we're right back where we started. I did an interview with the CDC, and we did it as part of something we were exploring, a series where we look at the real-world counterparts to video games. When Fallout 4 came out, we went to Fukushima, and we made a video called Fallout from Fukushima to explore the real world of this phenomenon. I also did a short where I interviewed the CDC, and we did an explainer about what happens when an outbreak happens in response to the video game The Division. And we also did a short about Directive 51, which is also an aspect of where the president could just snap his fingers and make a new government. Yes, it's called Directive 51. It was made by Bush. And this was also in response to The Division. So for now, I guess the main gist of this video is it would seem that as of last August, there was still concern that we're not necessarily prepared for what we might need going into the future. And it seems like there's an Ebola outbreak that is starting to freak people out, and it was supposed to be contained a long time ago, and it hasn't been. So I'll leave the story there. Stick around. I got one more video coming up in a few minutes. I will see you then.